I am the Director of Sustainability and Resilience for Mayor John Cooper, and welcome to the first Sustainability Advisory Committee of 2021. Happy New Year, everyone. We today are going to cover a report that the Sustainability Advisory Committee has been working on for about a year to the mayor on some great ideas on how we can mitigate our climate-related emissions here in Nashville and Davidson County and as a metropolitan government. I'm going to start off by just going over a little bit of what brought us to this point. For those of you who've engaged with this committee previously, this is not new information, but we may have new folks on the phone or on the call today. But in 2019, Mayor Cooper recommitted Metro government to the Global Covenant of Mayors Agreement, which is the world's largest cooperative effort among mayors and cities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, track progress, and prepare for the hazards that climate change will bring upon our communities, such as extreme temperatures, flooding, and tornadoes. As a result of signing this agreement, Metro Nashville has to do a few things. We have to inventory both our municipal government and community scale greenhouse gas emissions on a recurring basis. Then, based on that emissions inventory, we have to establish reduction targets to mitigate carbon pollution identified in those data sets. We then have to establish a climate action plan and track progress toward achieving the targets through the measures identified in that plan. And we also have to develop a separate plan for how we're going to adapt to climate, given that we're already sort of down the pike on things happening in our environment that pose a risk to human and environmental health. This really aligns Nashville with what's going on across the country and, of course, across the world. This is where we are on our compliance with those requirements as of last year. So work that was done last term on getting our greenhouse gas emissions done, establishing the targets and embracing those publicly. We did some analysis on the largest mitigation potential, got us all of our badges on the mitigation side. We've done some work to assess our climate risks here in Davidson County, but we still have work to be done for establishing a measurable adaptation program, and you'll hear a little bit about that today. But this committee, the Energy Subcommittee and the co-chairs and others have recommended that Nashville's climate action plan be structured around targets of greenhouse gas emissions reductions for both Metro government operations and the community, that's Davidson County, of 80% by 2050 from a 2014 baseline. This was recommended after a comprehensive review of emissions targets from peer and aspirational cities across the country, as well as what's required to meet science-based recommendations in the Paris Climate Accord to avoid what scientists are calling catastrophic warming. This is just a snapshot of what all Metro government is emitting. You can see our buildings represent the largest opportunity. The Green Building Subcommittee will talk with you a little bit about some ideas on that front. We've got employee commute opportunities and our wastewater treatment facilities as well. On the community side, Davidson County, this is something that incoming Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg has been talking about in interviews recently, but transportation has surpassed all other sectors in terms of its carbon emissions. And this is something that's replicated in cities across the country and also at the national level. You'll hear from the Mobility Subcommittee about some great recommendations around electrification of the vehicle fleet and making our city more supportive of active transportation, such as walking, biking, and mass transit. And with that, assuming Mayor Cooper is ready, I will turn it over to him to welcome you all and give some opening remarks.
Well, good morning. If everybody can hear me, happy Monday morning. And I want to thank Linda Bregan and Eric Hunstein for their leadership of this committee. And thanks to all the committee members and especially the 10 subcommittee chairs for your great efforts in this report. Nashville is so lucky to have this group. You're incredibly smart, talented subject matter experts. We're lucky how involved you are in the future of our community. And a special thanks to our partners at Vanderbilt for their support, as well as their leadership in creating a more sustainable Nashville. I know there's a renewed sense of urgency to address the environmental challenges we're facing here at home. Now, the last time we spoke, I mentioned the 2010 flood and how it forced Nashville to confront the reality of climate change. Since then, we've been hit by an EF3 tornado, and lives were lost and hundreds were injured, and over 2,000 buildings in Nashville were damaged or destroyed. It was the sixth costliest tornado in U.S. history, with more than $1.5 billion in damage. And then 2 months later, there was a derecho with over 70-mile-per-hour winds sweeping through Davidson County, and it destroyed even more homes and businesses. It knocked out power to a record 130,000 residents, and that was all at the start of the COVID pandemic. Now, a changing climate creates conditions that hosts these destructive storms. And it's our most vulnerable neighbors who suffer the most, as we saw in 1998, and in 2010, and in March and May of last year. The inequities in our community are made worse when our lowest income neighbors are displaced, and access to work, school, healthcare, and other basic needs get interrupted. And that's why we have to take decisive action, and why your measurable, actionable recommendations are so important. Now, I'm happy to report progress in several areas of sustainability that Metro has made since this committee was formed. Now, thanks especially to the work of Council Members Sledge, O'Connell, and Cash, Metro has upgraded our building codes to the 2018 standards issued by the U.S. Department of Energy. This will improve wind resistance of buildings to 115 miles per hour, and it will increase the energy efficiency of new homes and other buildings in Nashville. And let me just say, it is frequently cited in the literature that codes is the #1 way for cities to act effectively in dealing with climate change. And we should have a special, it wasn't that noticed in the community, but a special shout out to our council and to the city of Nashville for acting on this difficult to do reform. Now, in November, we also announced a solar project partnership with Vanderbilt through TVA's Green Invest program. Metro is the first local government in the whole TVA territory to pursue a Green Invest project. And Metro's solar array in Tullahoma will generate 125 megawatts of clean energy and help Metro reach 1/3 of our 100% renewable energy goal. 1/3. Now, this is the clean energy equivalent of removing over 14,000 cars from the road every year for 20 years. Now, we're also getting more solar on Metro buildings with new rooftop panels at the Sheriff's Office downtown campus, Metro Police Headquarters, Bellevue Community Center, and Fire Station 37. And I've appointed Mike Vandenberg, a nationally renowned climate policy expert, to the Electric Power Board. Last month, we introduced a community-led transportation plan that prioritizes lower emissions. The plan prioritizes more high-capacity transit, excuse me, invests heavily in sidewalks and bike paths, and will streamline traffic to reduce congestion. As the Biden administration begins, I also look forward to national climate leadership that reflects the commitment of cities like ours. A renewed commitment to the Paris Agreement, a reversal of dangerous rollbacks on environmental protections, and coordination at all levels of government to reduce emissions and increase energy efficiency. As I've said before, the work of environmental protection and justice is not easy. It is worthy of our best efforts. And so, on behalf of all Nashvillians, thank you for your work on the Sustainability Advisory Report, and thank you for your commitment to help create a greener, healthier community for all of us. And now I'd like to turn it back over with my thanks to Committee Co-Chair Linda Bregan. Thank you so much.
And actually, I think Eric, thank you, Mayor, and I think Eric Hofstein's going to start us off.
Eric, I think you're on mute, so start over. There you go.
I'm sorry, I was off mute for a moment, but I just want to begin by saying how pleased we are to have this opportunity for the full Mayor's Sustainability Advisory Committee to meet with Mayor John Cooper and to thank Mayor Cooper for convening this group. I want to call out the efforts of several people in particular: Mary Beth Eichard, Laurel Creech, Mike Jameson, the many Metro staff who supported the subcommittees, and members from my team and my co-chair Linda Bregan's team, Ashley Majewski and Akili Hu. Because of the tireless efforts of those individuals, of our subcommittee co-chairs, and all of the members of the committee, we are in a position today to present the findings of the committee to Mayor Cooper. Thank you. So by way of reminder, the Mayor's Sustainability Advisory Committee process started last February. We held several public meetings, all of which can be found on the Metro Nashville website. We established subcommittees by topic that have been meeting separately as groups, and we pulled in 2 sustainability experts, Professors Mike Vandenberg and Jonathan Gilligan from Vanderbilt University, who played an important advisory role as the committee report came together. It's important to note that while Metro staff supported each of the subcommittees, the recommendations made in the report are attributable to the committee as a whole and its subcommittees. The report itself is not the city's climate action plan, but rather is intended to inform and to provide advice on the city's climate action plan. I also want to note the engagement of the Mayor's Youth Council in this work. It's really exciting and rewarding to see the interest and intellect of our city's youth being brought to bear in an inclusive way in the development of the report, especially as we know that the path to a sustainable future for our city is an ongoing effort and one that will require our youth to continue to step up and exert their leadership. I also want to say that while the report is about mitigation actions themselves and not so much about adaptation and how to respond to effects of climate change, our colleagues Jacqueline Mathupi and Janie Camp have been doing important and ongoing work on adaptation and resilience that will be a focus of the committee as our work continues. We also have to acknowledge the unprecedented challenges that our city, our country, and world face with the COVID-19 pandemic. There are many dimensions to the threats of COVID-19, and clearly the importance of healthy cities is underscored by these public health challenges and make the implementation of these plans all the more important. The political picture has changed rather dramatically since we developed these recommendations. We have a new president who's placing an unprecedented priority on climate change, and just by way of example, has set a target for decarbonizing the entire electric grid of the United States by 2030. Finally, what we'll cover today is a very small subset of the recommendations the committee generated. There's a report exhibit that provides a much more comprehensive list that we hope will act as an ample menu of options for taking action on climate change. With that, I'd like to turn it over now to Linda Bregan for a report overview. And once again, thank you.
Thank you, Eric. It's been great working with you on this project. Good morning, and thank you, Mayor Cooper, for your leadership and support of the city's climate action plan. What we want to do today is walk you through the climate mitigation actions that will help the city most in reducing its carbon footprint. And before I turn it over to our subcommittee co-chairs, I want to touch briefly on some overarching issues that apply to all of the substantive areas we're going to talk about today. And perhaps the most important point we can emphasize is that while taking action to reduce our climate footprint is important in and of itself, there are also really important co-benefits. And in fact, research indicates that co-benefits are what motivate many cities to take action. Chief among them is improved public health, because air pollutants that harm public health are reduced when we move to renewable energy and reduce vehicle miles traveled by cars. Economic development is also an important co-benefit. New research shows that businesses are increasingly taking into account the carbon intensity of a city's grid when they decide where to locate and expand their businesses, because many businesses have set their own carbon reduction goals and need or want renewable energy. New jobs in the renewable energy sector also increase and can be coupled with job training initiatives, and equity goals can be achieved. Many of the measures we recommend, including weatherization programs and building code updates, will not only lower our carbon footprint, but also reduce the energy burden on low-income households. which leads to another overarching issue, environmental equity. And you talked about this some. I mean, this last year, it certainly focused us all on the historical and persistent inequities in our society. We tried throughout our work to take into account the disproportionate share of pollution and climate change impacts imposed on low-income communities and communities of color. But we recommend that much more needs to be done to fully listen to and understand the problems from those who are most impacted, and to find ways to integrate systemic change into the way that the city develops and implements its climate action plan. And next, I just want to say a quick word about what we called leadership initiatives. The challenge of reducing a city's carbon footprint is significant. It demands leadership and partnerships across the public and private sectors, particularly because the private sector can play a significant role in reducing the burden on city staff and budgets. As a result, mayors around the country are calling on their business, philanthropic, university, nonprofit communities to help implement their climate action plans. The options we lay out range from simply meeting with leaders from each sector to request their general support of the climate action plan, to more proactive approaches such as requesting specific mitigation or project pledges. So those are some, but not all, of the cross-cutting issues we identified as warranting attention. And now let's turn to the individual subcommittee recommendations. The recommendations are focused on the actions that have the most climate mitigation potential. We look to the academic literature, particularly the work of two Vanderbilt professors who have identified what they call 3 essential choices or forks in the road that, if followed, will typically make most cities' mitigation goals attainable. These big rocks, as my co-chair calls them, are decarbonization of the electrical grid, electrification of motor vehicles, and electrification of buildings. The committee's recommendations focus on proactive steps to achieve these actions, but also on lock-in effects to avoid. These are decisions in the near term that could seriously impede Nashville's ability to reach its long-range targets, such as purchasing a new diesel, bus fleet or failing to update the energy building codes every 3 years. However, we also know that long-range actions and policies don't always correlate with practical political and budgetary realities or the electoral cycles. So we worked with your terrific staff, particularly Mary Beth Eichard. And I just want to say you have a small sustainability staff, but it's a mighty staff. They are doing incredible work. And we worked with them to identify some shorter term actions. So the subcommittee co-chairs will start with the big picture and priority mitigation actions, and then we'll highlight some shorter term actions. And fortunately, in many cases, progress can be made on the biggest mitigation actions fairly quickly and at low cost. As we turn to the first subcommittee slide, I do want to stipulate that we know, and your staff told us, that our slides are a little densely packed. I hope you'll look at these somewhat cluttered slides as a reflection of our tremendous enthusiasm and our surfeit of ideas. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Mikhail Houghton and Jenny Park, the co-chairs of the Natural Resources Committee. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Good morning, Mayor Cooper. Jenny Park with the Trust for Public Land and I were happy to serve as co-chairs of the Natural Resources Committee. Our subcommittee is unique among the committees of our colleagues to follow in that our recommendations represent opportunities for carbon sinks, and the subcommittee reports that follow will outline carbon emission reductions. So the real progress toward greenhouse gas reductions will be in the slides that follow. There we go. Thanks, Mary Beth. But this is a great place to start, and we're excited to share what our subcommittee came up with. So the vision is to ensure that Nashville remains sustainable by providing residents with access to clean air, water, and open space for not only the city's economic growth, but also for the physical, spiritual, and mental health of our residents. In the left column of the slide, you'll see policy focus areas, and really we hope that the city looks to open space as a resource, and as the city converts from its industrial land to out of industrial use, we hope that we'll see it as an opportunity to reclaim that for ecosystem services, parks, climate resilience opportunities as well. We think additionally that there are opportunities to use public space to grow food, to create wildlife habitat, more recreation as the city's recreation inhabitants develop diverse recreational interests. So I'll not read the slide to you anymore, but shift over to priority actions. We think that Plan to Play remains a very strong vision for the park system, and recommend that we revisit Plan to Play and creative funding mechanisms to bring those recommendations to fruition. And the second priority action that I would highlight is to reimagine the city's downtown riverfront with a combination of flood mitigation and open space strategies, particularly on the East Bank. And with that, I'll turn it over to my fellow co-chair, Jenny Park.
Thanks, Mikhail. One lock-in effect to avoid is to really hold on to existing public land that can be used for any of these strategies. What we've already spoken about and some additional near-term actions will require public land, and we know that the cost of real estate continues to rise. And so a lock-in effect to avoid is to go ahead and maintain any existing public land that could be used for these purposes, as well as prioritizing acquisition of additional park land. And now I'll talk about some near-term opportunities. So one priority that we recommend is to develop a countywide strategy for green infrastructure investments. And this can result in a near-term list of five-year short list of green infrastructure projects. This type of work is important, and it can also be coordinated across multiple departments. And it mitigates the impact of climate change, including increased heat, flooding, and violent weather in communities who are already experiencing economic and health disparities. Another opportunity that can be initiated in the near term is piloting a turf to grasslands conversion project. This has benefits to habitat and also minimizes operating costs for parks maintenance. A potential site for a grassland restoration could be Ravenwood Park or the recently acquired 107-acre Bells Bend parcel that was formerly used as a sod farm. Another priority that Mikhail touched on earlier is Plan to Play diversification of funding streams for the park system. This can really help achieve many of our recommendations with additional funding and creative strategies, including public-private partnerships. One other that I will mention is implementing a joint or shared use agreement with the Parks Board and Metro Nashville Public School Board will allow residents across the city to utilize existing green space in schoolyards and create greater 10-minute walk access for Nashville residents outside of school hours. This joint or shared use agreement can result in greater park space accessibility with limited capital investment and limited increases in operating costs. So this is a very efficient way to help achieve the Plan to Play goals of additional park space. And one additional that I will highlight is an opportunity to work to enable farming leases on park land where appropriate. We heard a lot that, urban agriculture is an opportunity for Nashville to really further develop, and this will have positive impacts both by increasing education awareness around agriculture and environmentalism, but also by reducing the transportation emissions associated with food delivery by increasing local food. And so one opportunity for this would be to work with council on an ordinance that would make this legal within Nashville on appropriate portions of parkland.
Great. Thank you so much, Helen and Jenny. They're great, really thoughtful recommendations. We're going to hand it over now to Ann Davis and Tiffany Wilmot to talk about the Energy Subcommittee recommendations. And I'm just going to remind everyone, we have so much information we want to communicate, but we need to try to do it as quickly as possible so everyone gets a chance to present because the mayor has limited amount of time. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Linda, and thank you, Mayor, for convening this group. I like that you said at the beginning, we need to take decisive action. This is a truly, really important, I can't think of anything more important that we need to be focused on right now, and it does take decisive action and leadership. So I'm going to go over quickly the priority actions, the more long-term areas, and then my co-chair, Ann Davis, is going to walk us through the shorter term ideas. One thing I'd like to bring to your attention is that whenever we're talking about energy, we always want to reduce the energy consumption first. So that's the more boring part. The sexy solar part comes second, but reducing energy consumption over on the left-hand side, and then scaling up renewables and increasing transparency. Those are our three main focus areas. And I'd also like to bring to your attention that the government, so Metro's usage is 4.5%, say it's around 5% of the total. So the big elephant in the room is really the commercial, industrial, residential side, the private side. So we do want to bring to your attention that we want to focus on those. If you look over at the priority actions, I'm only going to highlight some of them. First, that solar on buildings is important. So you want to have your renewables as close to the source as possible. Second, we want to get back to this idea of a community-wide RPS, renewable portfolio standard. You've already done this for Metro, but we need to do this to go carbon-free for the private sector as well. Third, we want to look at the 100 largest energy users. So go to the place where we can get the biggest bang for the buck and help them improve their building efficiency and increase renewables. Fourth, we want to get back to net metering, and net metering is just a buzzword for being able to sell excess power back to TVA. So that's not something we can do right now, and we want to encourage that. We also want to negotiate with TVA to increase the 5% flexibility provision. Right now, TVA is allowing NES to buy 5% solar or some other energy from another user. We want to increase that. And Jeff Lyash at TVA has said that is a possibility. So that's something we want to push for. Sixth, we want to encourage NES to build more large-scale solar arrays. We already have Music City Solar, although this is less than 0.5% of the needs that we have. So we do want to expand that. And if possible, we want to do what Knoxville has done, where Knoxville Utilities Board actually paid for that. So we'd like to encourage that to happen. And then finally, we want to improve low-income household and weatherization. There's a program called Home Energy Lift that's great, but it just needs to be expanded. And then finally, I'll pass this to Ann after I say that equity is extremely important. And this is an area where equity has not been the case, and we need to encourage that more. So the roundup resolution is moving forward. And then I just would bring your attention to that portion at the bottom, that in the yellow, that we want to utilize the EBO law a little bit more. It's off to a good start, but it needs to be expanded. And so with that, I'll hand it off to Anne.
Thanks, Tiffany, and good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mayor Cooper, Linda, Eric, Mary Beth, and fellow committee members. This was a real team effort and really an enjoyable one, coming up with these recommendations. I'm just going to highlight a few things that Tiffany's already referred to, but if we do set a community-wide goal of 100% carbon-free electricity, we really need some utility solar in NES's fuel mix. And KUB did this with 502 megawatts. KUB paid for it and has this solar now that enables its customers to have clean energy in its mix. So that is a huge thing that we would like for NES to do and for Metro to encourage NES to do. Tiffany referred to net metering. We understand from a call yesterday we had with NES that TVA is not in favor of that anymore. They were when we met, but apparently they're not now. Although NES said they're open to devising some kind of solution there. So that would be something to work on. Behind the meter solar wherever we can, on Metro facilities, incentivizing solar installs by streamlining permitting, et cetera. And then finally, improving the governance transparency of NES. As you referred to, Mayor, the appointment of Mike Vandenberg was a fabulous addition to NES, and we need to continue to work with NES to move toward clean energy. And with that, I'll turn it over to Amanda Garcia with the Green Buildings Subcommittee.
Thanks so much, Anne and Tiffany. And as has been noted several times, excuse my voice, an essential part of decarbonizing the building sector is decarbonizing the grid. So our subcommittees worked very closely together. And I want to make sure I thank Bob Freeman, my co-chair, for his leadership on our subcommittee. He's not able to be here today. He serves in our legislature, which is back in session. But very much appreciate his contributions as well as everyone on our subcommittee. Our vision is a future in which the electricity serving our built environment is renewable and carbon-free, and Nashville's buildings are energy efficient. We want to achieve these improvements in a way that benefits marginalized communities. And because the energy subcommittee focused so much on the electricity side, I'll really focus on the energy efficiency components of our recommendations. I want to first say that we centered climate and equity in our recommendations. And I want to circle back to Linda's earlier point that there are significant co-benefits. And I think about it, and I think our subcommittee thought about it in terms of the 3 R's: reducing carbon emissions and energy bills, raising the profile of Nashville as a clean energy city, and making our city more resilient, more able to withstand those storms that Mayor Cooper referenced earlier. So with those sort of co-benefits in mind, our recommendations include establishing a mandatory energy benchmarking and reporting program for commercial buildings. And this really gets at our existing building stock, which is a place that consumes a lot of electricity. We want to make sure that we update our energy code every 3 years. And this is to avoid those lock-in effects that Linda referenced earlier. When we build our buildings, they're there for decades and decades and decades, and we need to make sure that we're building them up to the latest code standards. And I want to thank Mayor Cooper and Metro Council for taking a first step in that direction by adopting the 2018 code in this past legislative session. In terms of leadership initiatives, there are a couple of things that I think are important to get started on right away. One is collaborating with the other large city mayors in TVA's territory to urge Congress and the President to appoint climate conscious leaders to our TVA board and to grow clean power in TVA's fuel mix while enabling local power company innovation on renewables, like Ann was just discussing. On the building side, it's important to convene an industry roundtable to provide that leadership that Tiffany referenced earlier, our 100 largest energy users starting to benchmark voluntarily their energy usage and see where we can save money and reduce our carbon emissions in our existing commercial building fleet. In terms of equity, we support, as the Energy Committee said earlier, the expansion of investment in NES Home Energy Uplift Program, and think it's important for the Mayor's Office and Metro Council to be ensuring that NES is maximizing its investment in that program and also advocating for for TVA to expand it to multifamily housing in addition to single family residential. And as I said earlier, lock-in effects, we really need to commit to updating our energy code on a regular basis, as well as restructuring the relationship between Metro and NES to ensure that that the city's carbon goals are taken into account in policy decisions made by NES. And Mary Beth, if you could move to the next slide. A few additional near-term recommendations. First of all, as you saw, Metro's energy consumption in terms of the city itself, the most significant portion comes from the building sector. And so we recommend that Metro participate in the Better Buildings Challenge and start with Metro General Government, establish and fund the Energy Saving Revolving Fund, and consolidate Metro departments, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing under general services to make sure that all our buildings are meeting the same standards. I also want to highlight the recommendation to encourage the city's 100 largest energy users to report their energy use. That would be a voluntary benchmarking program that would set us on our way to ultimately a mandatory program. As I said earlier, working with Metro Council on legislation to commit to a review and update of the energy code every 3 years. Important is not just to update the energy code, but also to make sure that the codes department is enforcing that energy code. And one way of doing that would be to require the codes department to produce biannual reports on implementation. So making sure that we are auditing our buildings, our new buildings, for their compliance with our energy code. Finally, on equity, in addition to the home energy uplift recommendations that I mentioned earlier, we also support the launch of the opt-out roundup program. And in addition to that, with a focus on MDHA and working with them, with the MDHA board to adopt a LEED policy similar to the one that applies to Metro General Service buildings, as well as expand funds for MDHA's HVAC replacement program. And again, just circling back to these recommendations will not only reduce our energy consumption, leading to climate mitigation, but also help us build a more resilient building stock which will be especially important for our low-income residents as we move into a period of time with more extreme weather. Thank you so much, and I will hand it over to Todd and John.
Thank you, Amanda. Mayor Cooper, thank you so much for your leadership on this issue. For waste, our vision is to create a long-term solid waste master plan with the ultimate goal of achieving zero waste to landfill. And we already have that plan, which is called Achieving Zero Waste. It was created and passed in 2019. So now it's up to us to implement that plan, and that's the work ahead of us. Our targets in that plan are zero waste by the year 2050. And as you may know, we only 12% of waste in Nashville is actually recycled. So we have a big job ahead of us. Our policy focus areas, as you can see on the left, are number 1, centralized waste management, which we'll talk about here in a second. Number 2, residential and commercial recycling strategies. And number 3, food waste reduction. So these are our core policy focus areas. And I'll just turn to a few of the priority actions to speak about. So number 1, we need to establish a solid waste authority. This is by far the most important action item for waste management in our area. And this is to help us implement Achieving Zero Waste, our solid waste master plan. So first of all, this was something that was brought to us by our consultants who created that plan. The problem is that Metro Public Works only has authority right now over the USD, not the GSD. And that accounts for only 18% of our waste in the city. So the authority would serve much like a public utility in the same way that water does or electric does, and it would create a separate bill. And the whole point is to create consistency across both tax districts, both the USD and the GSD, commercial and residential, around all areas related to policy, ordinances, funding, bans, mandates, recycling, collection, and enforcement. And something that's critical here about the authority is that it shifts funding from the general ledger over to a self-funding mechanism, either a flat rate or a save-as-you-throw policy. So there are huge implications in terms of leadership for a solid waste authority for Nashville, and it could have regional implications down the line. Number 2, we want to implement a save-as-you-throw policy. This requires residents and businesses to pay only for the amount of trash they're sending to the landfill and ensure lower or no costs for those who recycle or compost. The important thing here to do is if we have a save-as-you-throw policy, we have to have a 3-bin system. Because if we're encouraging people to only throw the trash away that they have to have a way to recycle and to compost. So we need trash, recycling, and composting at the curbside. Nashville is the only city in the country with once per month recycling. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done as with Save As You Throw in terms of curbside recycling. Number 3, we need to support a Metro Council ordinance that mandates C&D recycling or C&D recycling deposit system. And then finally, a food waste ban that prohibits food scraps from trash collection, starting with large generators, but then also finally going down to residents once we have curbside organics in place. In terms of leadership, bringing business leaders together to talk about how they can contribute to that solid waste master plan. In terms of equity, we need to make sure that pricing structures minimize disproportionate financial impact on low-income communities. And we need to avoid all lock-in effects, including building and expanding landfills, which is part of the Achieving Zero Waste plan. On slide number 2, here are some additional near-term recommendations. So we need to institute a fee structure detached from the general fund as an interim step toward achieving the solid waste plan. Number 2, we need to issue an executive order to reach a county-wide goal of reducing food waste to landfill by 50% by the year 2030, which is our national goal. Number 3, we need to adopt a compost procurement policy that requires Metro departments and agencies to purchase compost for use in public landscaping projects. And number 4, we need to require applications for C&D permits to attach a plan for how they are going to recycle their waste on property. And finally, number 5, launch an every other week recycling service for Metro curbside recycling. And by the way, Metro Public Works already has procured the trucks and carts for every other week. So there's no capital needed. We just need to move forward with our commitment to the operating budget for personnel. So these are our recommendations for waste. Now I'd like to turn it over to our colleagues with the Mobility Subcommittee.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Mayor. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm Erin Hafkichil, and I'm serving as co-chair with Mary Vavra on the Mobility Subcommittee. First, on behalf of our subcommittee, I want to thank you, Mayor, your staff, and council for adopting the Metro Transportation Plan. This will be hugely important to help guide implementation of so many of the recommendations that our subcommittee has identified. When the subcommittee embarked on this task, we reviewed and compiled recommendations from Nashville Next, NMotion, Plan to Play, and the Walk and Bike Plan, all which had a robust public input process. Our subcommittee took a holistic approach, knowing that there's no silver bullet. People need equitable mobility options. Prioritizing cars at the expense of all other modes is no longer tenable. We need to upend this approach and focus on pedestrians, bicyclists, and transit riders. As I mentioned at the beginning of the call, emissions from the transportation sector continue to grow rapidly. There are two key trends to this troubling fact. Americans are driving more and we're buying more SUVs. As such, it is critical that we work to reduce this trend at both the national and city level. In order to do so, we need to both reduce vehicle miles traveled and accelerate the transition to electric vehicles. Neither action on its own will get us to our emission reduction goals. So we need action on both fronts simultaneously and need to put equity at the front of both of those priorities. Leadership is key, which is why in our priority actions, we recommended establishing a Metro DOT and passing transportation demand management policies. The vast majority of our peer cities have a model for such a legislation, and it's critical for empowering employers to take action on this issue. And it helps put alternatives to driving on a level playing field. For example, there's no such thing as free parking, one of my own personal issues. The hidden costs of parking make housing unaffordable. Residents and employees should be aware of these actual costs. 2 additional high priority actions, but admittedly not likely to be accomplished in the near term, are transitioning the Metro fleet, including MNPS and WeGo buses, to electric or other low emission technologies, and of course, securing dedicated funding for transit so that WeGo can make substantial and regular progress on implementing the Better Bus Plan and other recommendations included in the Metro Transportation Plan. We also recommend providing and maintaining adequate EV infrastructure and encouraging residents to purchase electric vehicles. Finally, before I turn it over to my co-chair, Mary, I want to mention 2 quick points. First, the need for equity throughout Davidson County. We need to implement an equity screening tool for use in every major modal plan and implementation steps to ensure that infrastructure investments are distributed equitably throughout the county. I also want to mention the connection between affordable housing and transportation. We were thrilled to see the recent announcement about the Metro Affordable Housing Task Force. So just want to make a plug for transit adjacent affordable housing. This is critical for achieving a wide variety of goals, including lowering VMT, improving air quality, lowering transportation costs for residents, and ensuring that any future transit investments are immediately beneficial to the communities that need them most. Research has proven that transit-oriented affordable housing is one of the most important stepping stones for families to move up into the next income bracket. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mary. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Great, thank you, Erin. And for the near term, we recommend investing in neighborhood infrastructure that supports active transportation. We need dedicated funding and robust annual capital funding for transit, sidewalks, and bikeways. And I want to take a moment here to specifically point out the large return on investment for a safe and fully connected bikeway system. The capital investment is roughly $8 million a year for 5 years to fully implement the priority network as identified in the Walk and Bike Plan. It would be a huge game changer. Our subcommittee also strongly recommends investing in critical greenway infrastructure, including the 23-mile City Central Greenway Loop. For our transit system, we need to provide more transit shelters, invest in neighborhood transit centers, and implement better bus, meaning more frequent service and longer hours, and other related improvements. As we move forward to eventually having a Metro DOT, we want to see, and to develop that better mobility transportation system, we recommend having engineers and planners work in the same building department. We also recommend transportation staff, as Aaron mentioned, to work with affordable housing staff and the new task force. We need to work with council to codify the Green and Complete Street executive order and enact meaningful TDM policies in consideration of land use types. We need policies that make it easier to build in areas where people are walking and can take transit and bike, such as downtown and the neighborhood centers. In some areas where we've got 100% of the people driving, sometimes it's easier to build there. So we definitely want to, incentivize those infield areas, as I mentioned. We want to emphasize the need to improve roadway safety by advancing Vision Zero, as Mayor, you're well aware of. And we're excited to see the new ordinance about reducing the speed limit. Thank you to you, your staff, and Metro Council. We think it'll be helpful to have an oversight committee to help track the progress of Vision Zero with strong participation from law enforcement. And we hope that the new Chief Drake will be interested in helping with that effort as well. As we touched on before, maintaining critical infrastructure such as electric vehicle charging stations and exploring partnerships with NES, and also having policies that encourage new development and homes to have EV infrastructure. And of course, modernizing the traffic management system to include Traffic Operations Center. In closing, I want to thank you and your amazing staff and council again for adopting the transportation plan. As you know, it's a critical time in Nashville to address mobility issues. We've seen successes in other communities like Austin, Texas with their Project Connect, and we know we must fund and implement these priorities here. And with that, I'll turn it over to Eric and Linda.
Thanks. I think, thank you all so much. That was an incredible amount of information presented very succinctly. I think, Eric, you were going to jump in first on the committee next steps.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Linda. If we could advance the slide. Thank you. So here you can really see a range of possible next steps for this Mayor's Sustainability Advisory Committee. I think it's really important to note that we do intend to continue our work together as a group, and we think we can do that in a whole range of ways. We'll help promulgate the recommendations of the committee. We can host education and outreach events with guest speakers that I think will really continue to harden and really expand the bonds and the connectivity in the Nashville sustainability community, which is really important. We'll support the Metro Nashville Public School efforts around reducing energy consumption across its substantial building portfolio, which we've talked about throughout this presentation today. We do, as noted, hope to engage with the newly appointed Mayor's Affordable Housing Task Force. And we also hope to convene leadership initiatives with really the business and philanthropic community that can support the Climate Action Plan implementation. And I personally want to bring further to bear the resources of Vanderbilt University by convening initiatives with other local colleges and universities that'll have a collective impact on carbon. So really a different way of summarizing this, I think, is that we really are just getting started. And I think as a committee, we are excited about the many, many efforts that lie ahead. And back to you, Linda, for further comments.
The only thing I would add, Mayor Cooper, is that when we first met with you, you talked about how important it will be to really explain to the Nashville community the impact of climate change and why this is important. So as Eric said, we are going to plan with your approval to do a whole series of meetings and outreach and education. And then, of course, we'll be working with your staff the actual climate adaptation plan, as well as, whatever y'all want help with. We have, 50 people with varying expertise who are happy to step up and help out. And as Eric said, I do think a key area would be for us to help you with some type of leadership initiative that has your imprimatur, but that, we could help move forward with either the business community or the philanthropic community. And without a doubt, Vanderbilt needs to work with the other universities in the community. So we appreciate your listening today. And I don't know if Mary Beth has anything she wants to add, but we're obviously quite happy to take any questions.
No, I think Mayor may have some closing comments. We'll turn it over to him if he'd like to do that.
Well, thank you, Mary Beth, and everybody. I mean, I was awed and so impressed for this outstanding, amazing blue ribbon work. And now help me get this done. Help me get this done. And I'm grateful for the talent of the committee and the effort that was put into this report. I mean, it is an exciting time, I think, to get a lot done. I mean, there's a great opportunity to work with my fellow mayors with the largest cities in TVA to communicate our shared priorities on climate policy, both to Washington and to the TVA Board of Directors. But so many ideas are coming from this committee that Metro can pursue internally. And by working with our friends on the council to adopt new legislation with a climate impact. Now, out of the box, I heard so much today, including planning for green infrastructure and revisioning downtown's East Bank for flood resilience, and partnership between our school district and our parks for opportunities for neighborhood recreation, and working with NES in so many ways, but on a more renewable energy in their fuel mix and how to get that done. And then engaging the business community on making Nashville's largest existing buildings more efficient, and while also making Metro's older buildings more efficient. And then accounting for all modes, not just cars, and traffic impact studies. And it's going to be a big topic, I think, in the years ahead, the restructuring of our solid waste program, as we stand up a new Department of Transportation to help business and the public recycle and compost more. But all of your recommendations are helping Nashville become greener, cleaner, more beautiful, more livable, and greater, really, the city that we want to live in the 21st century. So I'm overwhelmed. It's so remarkable and exciting, your work, but I want to thank everyone on the Sustainability Advisory Committee for all that you've done, but this is just the start. Now we have to go get stuff done. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, I think we can adjourn.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.